If you're trying to get somebody out of a racist mentality, you can't mince words. You have to remind them that these social constructs that their ancestors created that are continuing to oppress people of color today, racism is not comfortable for people of color. So why would I try to make a white person comfortable in my presence while trying to deconstruct the racism that I am having to experience on a daily basis?
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Visit sumudpod.com to subscribe and connect with us on social media. Consider supporting our work through a contribution on the Support Us page.
On this episode of the Sumud Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Constanza Eliana Chinea. Constanza Eliana is a Boricua journalist, producer, and decolonial force. Raised between New York, Puerto Rico, and Illinois, she knows what it feels like to be erased by systems, by media, and by narrative. So she founded Malcriá Media, an independent platform for social justice, politics, and decolonial praxis, built to center marginalized perspectives. Her work isn't for comfort, it's for justice. Welcome, Constanza.
Hello, so good to be here.
Did I get your name right?
Yes,
Okay.
pretty close. Constanza Eliana.
Okay. So you go by the full name? Constanza
Yeah.
Eliana. Okay.
Yeah, Boricuas like to make it very difficult for everyone.
All good. And again, for the audience, I've given her permission to correct me the entire time I'm doing this interview. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows my accent and my language is not the greatest. So please forgive me in advance. I do want to get some terms out of the way so that you can help me and help the audience understand. So, for example, what does Boricua mean?
Yeah, so Boricua is an indigenous term. It is the Taino, which are my ancestors. Those are the indigenous people of the whole of the Caribbean, Puerto Rico included. So that is the name of the people. It's a term that has become a little bit commercialized, but in its true essence, it is who we are as an indigenous people, are Boricua.
Amazing. And how about the difference between Latin, Latina, Latinx, or Latinx rather?
hmm Yeah. So these are terms that were brought about by Eurocentric westernized people who didn't know what to call people from the global south and the Caribbean, Spanish speaking countries that had been colonized by Spain. And so they kind of lumped all of us together in this Latin America category, which, the borders are false. We all know that. But they created these terms and these borders rooted out of colonialism. So they labeled Latin America because most of Latin America, as we know it today, was colonized either by Portugal or Spain. And so they decided to lump all of us together. So when, we have magazines and TV shows and people say Latin or Latino, Latina, these are gendered colonial terms that come from the Spanish language predominantly and also Portugal. So in Brazil, they will use slightly different terms, but alongside that, it is also racialized as well, because as we know, Haiti or Haiti, also a part of the Caribbean, should also be a part of this fake Latin America that was created for them, but they are not considered to be Latino or Latina or Latine. The Latinx and Latine is an attempt to ungender the natural gendered language that we have. So it's meant to be like a gender neutral stance. A lot of people have a problem with the X because we don't technically pronounce the X in our language. And so only certain countries do. And so Latine is now being more widely used, but still not nearly as much as Latina and Latino to kind of state who we are as a people. But all of these things are colonial terms. We use them because we have to, not because we want to.
What would you use if you had obviously you do have a choice here, actually. This is in your world,
Yeah.
right? What would you say?
Yeah. So typically I will say Boricua as often as I can. Now, in America, that's not a term that people really know or understand unless they listen to a lot of Bad Bunny. And so, sometimes I do have to switch to I'm Latine or I'm Puerto Rican, but I prefer Boricua because it both acknowledges my Puerto Rican ancestry or my Puerto Rican nationality and also my indigenous roots. So that's what I prefer.
So you were born in New York, you were raised in Puerto Rico, and then you moved to Illinois. How did those moves going through different spaces really shape your view of your identity?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny that you opened it up with, what is Latino, what is Latina, because I didn't know those terms until I moved to the US. So I wasn't really tapped into that. I was still relatively young when I first moved to the US. I was going into second grade and had somewhat of a knowledge of who I was. But when I moved and had to like switch languages and learn a new language, learn a new culture, learn what snow was, it was such a shock. It was a huge shock. And it really shaped the way that I grew up into adulthood. I always talk about that time as being really essential to my identity because when you grow up surrounded by your people, that's all you know, that's who you are, right? You don't know anything else. You don't really understand other social constructs until you are forced to. And I think racialized people know this a lot more so than like white America does, or even white Latinos or people who are considered white in other nationalities. Because when you are racialized by society, that's when you begin to understand being othered. And so while racism might be a construct that you're familiar with, culturally, you don't if you're living in a certain country surrounded by your people. And so when I was removed from that, I was forced to look at myself in a different way because other people were looking at me in a different way. Learning English for the first time was really difficult. I was taught by a very nice white lady with very good intentions, but I was taught to speak correctly in English, speak the right way, not the way that some of my peers were speaking. I was in an environment where it was very multicultural. I had a lot of Black friends. I had a lot of Latino friends. I had Indian friends. My first best friend was Vietnamese. And so I was being taught to speak English correctly while my peers were also struggling along with me to understand what that truly meant, even if they were American. It was really fascinating to unpack that in my adulthood because assimilation is a process that is not necessarily explicit a lot of the times. And you don't really learn that you are being assimilated until you're much older. And so once I started unpacking what the assimilation process that I had to go through, I really looked back at my childhood and realized, wow, like colonization just continued for me. Not only was I raised on a colonized island, a colony of the United States, while our culture kept and preserved a lot of our roots, there was still a lot of American and Western influence, but it wasn't until I moved to the United States that I realized, wow, like I really am a product of colonization. And the racism, the xenophobia that I was experiencing, the misogyny, the sexism, that was all an extension of what I had been growing up with.
So, how do you relate to this idea of being a colonial refugee?
Mhm. Yeah, it's something that I'm using a lot more these days because I don't think people understand it. I think people understand the concept of being an immigrant or being a migrant. It's something that we're hearing a lot more about, rightly so, the experiences of migrants, the struggles that they have to go through. When you are coming from a colony of the United States, you are not technically considered an immigrant because you have status. You are automatically a US citizen. It's kind of the US's way of trying to not continue to piss us off and give us some status so that we won't fight too much and we won't revolt too much. But we are given automatic citizenship. Now, I was born in the United States, so, I'm a US citizen. Both of my parents were born on the island. They automatically get citizenship as well. And so it is a strange reality because you know you're from a different culture. You know you speak a different language. You know that you are not American, yet you are automatically given citizenship into the United States. And so you're a migrant, but not. It's a very, very strange place to be in. And so you have the experience of being a migrant. You experience xenophobia. A lot of Americans don't even realize that Puerto Rico is a colony. They think we're immigrants, right? Like they don't know who we truly are. So you have this very strange reality that you're living in. I like to say the experience of a colonial refugee where you are being forced out of your homeland because of colonization. And in our case, continued colonization. We were first colonized by Spain, and then we were stolen by the United States and colonized by them. It's a term that I would like for people to use a lot more because not only of just the status of Puerto Ricans, but all colonial refugees who have had to leave their homeland because of some sort of colonization from some sort of country, European or otherwise. It's important for us to remind people that no one wants to leave their homeland. They are typically forced to do so unless they have a lot of privilege. And I think that is a very unique reality. It doesn't make us victims, but it just forces people to look at the reality of it.
Puerto Rico is not technically even the correct name for that area, right?
No.
What is it?
Yeah. That's the colonial term that Spain gave us. So it means rich land or rich soil. That is basically what Columbus decided to to name us once he quote unquote discovered us or, got lost in the Caribbean and decided to bring a bunch of colonizers and take over the Caribbean first and then the rest of Latin America. And every Indigenous Peoples Day, I have to remind people that Columbus did not colonize the United States. He colonized the Caribbean. We were the first people to get colonized. It was first Haiti or Haiti, which at the time was just Haiti. It was not Dominican Republic and Haiti yet. And then he came back to the Caribbean and colonized the rest of it. He colonized Cuba, Puerto Rico, I believe Jamaica as well, or Jamaica, and a bunch of other Caribbean places. And then they decided to move towards Latin America. So that would be Mexico, Colombia, all of those places. And so I have to remind people like we have been through this multiple times, not only in 1492, but then again 125 years ago when the US, under false pretenses, decided to steal us from Spain through the Spanish American War. So, it's fucked up. It's a fucked up history.
So just to reiterate, what was the correct way of saying it then? Because I'm not going to say
Oh,
I'm
yes.
not going to say Puerto Rico anymore. I'm going to just try.
Yeah. And it's okay because that's what people know, right? So if you have to say it, it's totally fine for context. But our indigenous island name is actually Borinquen. So that's why we say Boricua, because we are from Borinquen.
Gotcha. Are we going to make a movement to change it or?
We've been trying. Yeah, we've been trying to remind people we are from Borinquen. There's a lot of podcasts that are called that just to remind people like that's what we should be calling our island. But because on paper, legally and technically, it's still Puerto Rico, that's what people know us by. But yes, there is a movement to re-indigenize our island name.
And you talked about this a little bit, but you navigated this whole world through sort of this westernized lens.
Yeah.
How did that really affect your connection to Puerto Rico, the culture, the Puerto Rican culture, and your overall identity growing up?
Yeah, it's hard to say because that assimilation process was just like beat into you.
Mm.
And the way that I like to describe it is that I always felt like I was from Puerto Rico. I always felt like I was Boricua. I always was reminded of that at home. My parents were very adamant you are going to continue learning Spanish. You are going to continue being able to communicate with your family members, which is a whole other thing because Spanish also isn't our indigenous language.
What is the indigenous language, just for the audience?
So it is Taino. The historical context of that is that technically the language did die out linguistically. They're trying to revive it back. I actually wrote an article for the LA Times about indigenous language revival, and Taino was one of them. Taino is not the technical term for the language, but because millions of Tainos were wiped out, the language was essentially dead or considered dead. There are multiple tribes now that are trying to recreate a language that is very similar to what our ancestors spoke. We are technically Arawaks as well. There's a little bit of a mix of what we know to be Taino and what we know to be Arawak language, and they're trying to merge the two in order to recreate the language and bring it back. That's very difficult to do. It takes a very long time. And so that's why we don't speak our indigenous language. All of that goes back to the Spanish and Catholic Church, who assimilated a lot of the surviving Tainos after colonization.
Did you experience a lot of bullying growing up?
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. I had an accent when I was first learning English. So I was definitely bullied over my accent. That's why I tell people now, because a lot of people are surprised that I don't have an accent, either in Spanish or in English. And I always remind people that part of my assimilation was I was sick and tired of getting bullied. And so I really learned to pronounce and enunciate my words. So that's why I'm so good at speaking now, because I really made an effort in my younger years to learn the language and to not continue to get bullied over having an accent. Both of my parents still have an accent. And I remember going to the grocery store or going around town and just seeing people's faces kind of turn whenever they would hear them speak. And noticing those little nuances when you're growing up, you're like, oh, I don't want to be treated like that. So let me make sure that I do everything possible to not be treated that way. So there was definitely a lot of bullying. Obviously, I have curly hair. I was living in the Midwest when I first moved to the United States. And, curly hair is not the norm for the Midwest. I did go blonde at one point, would not recommend. But these are all the things that we have to do as colonial refugees to try and fit in.
Yeah, I can't offer much advice on hair, unfortunately. But true story, growing up, I had dirty blonde curly hair. I couldn't even brush it. Not many people know that, but I think that changed about the age of 20. It just all went away all of a sudden. When I read about your story and your background, I read that you got into yoga. And the way I envision it was you got into yoga to an extent to escape some of the real world, to find
Yes.
peace, to meditate, and to really sort of center yourself. But then you're hit with this reality that even within the yoga community, is that the right way of phrasing it?
Mhm. Yeah.
There's a lot of racism. There's a lot of stealing Black and brown traditions within the yoga
Yes.
community as well. Can you talk about that experience?
Absolutely. You're 100% right. It was an escape for me. I was in my early 20s and I was essentially a binge alcoholic. I wasn't well and I didn't know what to do with my life. I just felt like my life was so upside down and I wanted to go back to my homeland, but was being told I couldn't because the colonial status was so intense and the economy was really bad and corruption was really high. And so I didn't know what to do with myself and I felt really lost. And so I started taking meditation classes and just thought, oh, this is the answer.
Yeah.
I'm just going to meditate the rest of my life and got sucked into the wellness industry and got sucked into the cultural appropriation of it all and didn't realize that that's what I was doing. And so it took many years for me to kind of realize, oh, I'm just replicating more of the same. I'm being a part of more of the same. And it took a while for me to get out. As a yoga teacher, I learned a lot about guiding people through their pain and their struggle. But I also learned that I was being more of a tool of white supremacy. I was being utilized for white people's not only entertainment in a way, because yoga ended up becoming a sport for people, white people specifically. I was also being utilized as their escape from their own white supremacy, while at the same time experiencing much of the xenophobia and the racism and the sexism within the industry. And so, again, I found myself in between a rock and a hard place. I found something, meditation, which felt like an escape and I thought was healing me. And at the same time, I was in an industry, billion-dollar industry, that was forcing me to look a certain way, talk a certain way, act a certain way, and appropriate from a culture that wasn't mine. And so once I really took a hard look at that, at the reality of what I was doing and what I was a part of, I started making steps to get out of that industry and eventually landed in DEI work. And now journalism, which is what I'm a part of, was a fascinating time in my 20s.
So I think if I read correctly, you switched from teacher to critic and you had a blog, Hippies and Granola.
Yeah.
Bet you didn't think I would find that. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was a name that just sounded fun to me. And again, you have to kind of sell yourself in that industry. You have to sell yourself as healthy and thin and, fun. And people have to trust that you're able to guide them through these meditation practices and be flexible and guide them through handstands and all of these things. And so it was really more so me trying to fit into the marketing of it all. That period in time of my life was a time where I really was just trying to heal myself while also healing others and realizing that that's not something you can do, that only that person, you yourself, are the only person who can help you get through healing by educating yourself, by looking at the reality of things. And me attempting to run away from my pain by entering an industry that was appropriating other people's culture was not it.
Yeah.
It did help me become the person that I am today, I will say, but only because I chose to look at the reality of things. There are still many, many people who are stuck in that world who think that they are doing good and, again, have the best intentions, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Like the road into continuing to be an agent of white supremacy is paved with good intentions. And so I decided to get out of that world, and I'm very happy not to be a part of it anymore.
Did you use that blog to speak out at all, or was that too soon?
Eventually, it took a decade, but eventually I did. Eventually, when I decided to do anti-racism and DEI work, I did it within the industry. And I did make an attempt to educate people within the industry, other yoga teachers, other yoga studio owners. And initially, it felt like I was doing good work. But eventually I realized that that wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't really doing the type of work that I was supposed to be doing, which is what I feel I'm doing now with journalism, is really telling people stories through their own lived experience, through their own words. I felt like I was kind of talking to brick walls after a while, like neoliberal mentality that thinks it's being progressive while refusing to stop culturally appropriating another culture. Just trying to make a lot of excuses to keep being in the yoga industry, but using all the right words, all the anti-racist terms and all the DEI terms to pass themselves off as more progressive than they were. So I decided to stop that too.
So decolonization in practice, overall philosophy is powerful, I believe, because your work isn't about white comfort. It's
Mhm.
not designed for white people, generally speaking. It's about healing. So for individuals who essentially deal with white supremacy and deal with these colonial effects on healing from that. Can you unpack that? Again, that's just a brilliant perspective I didn't hear before. So I'd
Yeah.
appreciate if you could unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, and that's essentially what made it difficult to remain a DEI consultant and an anti-racist educator, because so many people that were coming to me saying, I love what you're saying and I love what you're doing and I want you to come and teach us. I got approached by Google at one point and Facebook by one point. And ultimately, when it came down to it, they were scared about a lot of the terms that I was using. I very explicitly say white supremacy. That is not something that they are comfortable with. That is not something that they are used to, especially in the corporate space. Surprise.
Imagine trying to say Palestine too at this point. So yeah.
Ooh, scary. Even using the word colonization, colonialism, God forbid. It was an extremely, extremely difficult space to be in. And I just was not willing to compromise against my own morals and the morals that I was growing into as I was de-assimilating, if that's a word, and not willing to put white comfort in front of me and say, yeah, okay, give me a few dollars and I'll make you feel good about yourself. Like that just wasn't what I was interested in doing. And so ultimately, I decided to leave that too. But yes, I don't mince words. And when it comes to unpacking racism, you can't. If you're trying to get somebody out of a racist mentality, you can't mince words. You have to remind them that these social constructs that their ancestors created that are continuing to oppress people of color today, which is another social construct. People of color didn't used to exist until all of a sudden white supremacy is here. You cannot put people's comfort above deconstructing that type of mentality. It can't coexist. And too many people are trying to make that coexist. Racism is not comfortable for people of color. So why would I try to make a white person comfortable in my presence while trying to deconstruct the racism that I am having to experience on a daily basis? It just can't coexist. I have to put the mirror up in order to really try to get people to understand what we have to go through on a daily basis. And that requires me to explicitly say colonization currently exists, systemic oppression currently exists, and it is being enacted by well-intentioned white people.
The other thing I found fascinating about your work, maybe I did read this somewhere else another time, but for whatever reason, it resonated with me when I read about you, where you say essentially that not all activism is decolonial,
Yeah.
that it's not all glamour either, right? It's not what some people think it is. It's hard work. It's messy. Can you talk about
Yes.
that a little bit?
It's extremely messy.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are afraid to make a mistake in the messiness. And so that's where trying to make people comfortable comes in. But no, decolonization has really turned into a commodification, just like yoga has, just like spirituality has, just like indigenous culture has. And I really had to remind both myself and really take a look at myself and how I was attempting to decolonize myself while also teaching others. But to also take a look at when somebody says that they are decolonizing, are they actually doing that? Or are they just replicating more of the same again? And so, what I started noticing, and I was not immune from doing this, is that in our attempt to decolonize, we're essentially trying to appease white supremacy once again, where a lot of people aim to decolonize in a way where it's begging white people for a seat at the table. I want to be in the White House. I want to be in Congress. Therefore, I'm going to do everything that white people are doing under the guise of a black and brown face in order to then continue to enact white supremacist ideals under the guise of a black and brown face. Frantz Fanon is a master at deconstructing that ideology. He also was a colonial refugee from, I think, Martinique is where he was from. And he was a master at forcing us, people of color specifically, racialized people specifically, forcing us to take a look at ourselves and how we were trying to deconstruct white supremacy and replicating it at the same time. He was a master at this. And that is something that I try to take seriously. It's hard to avoid sometimes. And it's, again, very messy, and you will make a lot of mistakes. But I think in our attempt to decolonize, sometimes we don't realize that we really just want to be white people sometimes in a black and brown face. We just want their money, their power, their status, and we will do what it takes to get there while claiming to decolonize. And for me, that is a misstep. For me, we have to take a step back and realize, no, we want to go back to our indigenous roots and our indigenous ways, which means deconstructing our current political system, deconstructing what it means to be an activist and our activism. Are we just continuing to appease whiteness and falling under this nonviolent umbrella because that makes them feel more comfortable about our activism, when what we really should be doing is bold revolutionary work? That's where I'm at right now.
You know, before October 7th, I would have debated you being in the DEI space. No, we got to be strategic. We got to build relationships. We have to use their language. We
Mhm.
have to really sort of work with them on how to view a lot of what we're going through. But after October 7th, I realized I was just being assimilated as well. And
Yeah.
you don't realize it until after. Something has to happen or shift for you to really realize that. So I really do think many have woken up from that to an extent.
Mhm.
Do you agree with that, or do you still think that there's a huge gap?
I do. And again, that goes back to my point of if you are too comfortable, it's not revolutionary. You're not going to revolutionize yourself or other people because you are too comfortable in the scraps that they're giving you. And it's not until something big happens to wake you up to the reality of here's what you have become accustomed to, and here's the bomb now that has been dropped in front of your face to really show you all of those things that you thought were going to free you, they didn't free you. They're only oppressing you even more. It's inevitable. And this is the constant struggle within our struggle. Because so many people still think, no, 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 no. If we just play nice and we just, again, go to the White House and make a couple statements, go to the UN, make a couple statements and hope and pray that they will humanize us again and stop colonizing our countries, then, we'll be able to see progress. If we do it in a politically respectable way, we will get our freedom. In the history of humanity, that has never worked.
Yeah, definitely has not worked. I experienced this within the Arab community. I'm wondering if you experience the same thing. If a decision has to be made, and I'm an Arab guy, and an Arab consultant, for example, would provide me guidance, I'd be like,
Mhm.
okay, that makes sense to me, maybe. But if I bring the white guy in with blue eyes, all of a sudden, I'm listening.
Yes.
And I
Mhm.
see this consistently within the Arab community. Do you face the same challenges?
Absolutely. And I think about it every single day. The white privilege persists even within our own cultural communities. And that is the white supremacy doing its job, right? I think we saw that a lot once people really started waking up to the Palestinian struggle after October 7th, like you mentioned. How many white American TikTokers, white European TikTokers, and YouTubers and Instagrammers did you see now being platformed as Palestinian experts? How many of them do you still see today being platformed as Palestine experts, going on panels as Palestine experts? It frustrates me to no end. And it's not to say that they aren't doing some good, because I do believe that white people are the only ones who can liberate other white people from their own whiteness. I do believe that. But they have to do that within their own communities and their own constructs. They cannot come into our spaces and claim to be experts of our struggles and then platform themselves or other people as the people who are going to liberate us, because that's not their job. It will never happen. And so, yes, it's a very, very, very frustrating thing. But it also goes down to colorism, because I could easily, very easily be platformed as an expert on anti Blackness, for instance, which many people tried to do. And I am not Black. And the colorism goes into play where people think, oh, somebody from outside the Black community can teach me better than somebody from within that community. And so it's the same mentality. Somebody from outside the Arab community can come in and liberate both Arabs and Americans and Europeans from all of this mess that they created themselves. It doesn't work. And so we have to really, really, as our individual communities and collective racialized communities, we have to stop platforming people from outside of ourselves to be the savior. They are never going to be the savior. Only we can save us.
And speaking of that, you created Embody Inclusivity, which created a space for people of color to unlearn assimilation. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so it was really an attempt for me, again, within that DEI space, within the wellness space specifically, and eventually I moved out of the wellness space, to show that the inclusion or the perception of inclusion that people were attempting to create within any type of space was an illusion. And so, in order for you to actually be inclusive of other people's not only joy, but also struggle, is to embody that sense of inclusion. I can't tell you that I'm creating a safe space for you without showing you that I am a safe and trustworthy person to be around. And so it's through action. You have to embody the actions of creating that trustworthiness that's actually going to help you as a person, as an individual, feel like, yes, this is a space that I can come into. And I think we see that physically, right? If I go to New York, I automatically feel included because it's so multicultural. People are so, well, can be very welcoming depending on the neighborhood. If I run into somebody, I actually literally ran into somebody over here at the beach who was wearing a Puerto Rican flag on their t-shirt. And immediate inclusion, right? I felt super connected right away. We had a cute little laugh, and this is a stranger to me. But that is how you create inclusion is you embody it. You have to become the type of person that through your actions, not through your words, through your actions, you show that, yes, I am including you as a part of my community. I am including you as a part of this space, not by telling you that, by showing you that. And so that's what embody inclusivity ultimately meant.
Did you see any transformations or did you witness any transformations throughout that process?
I did. Ultimately, for me, it didn't feel like enough, like journalism feels, but it did. And I still get DMs today from people who followed me from that world into now, who are very appreciative of the deconstruction that I have been able to provide. Again, only the individual can choose to deconstruct themselves, but they can be guided into that process. And I feel very grateful for the people who have stuck around and continue to this day to be very appreciative of my boldness when I do speak about these things, especially when it comes to racialized topics. But yeah, I did see quite a few transformations. When it came to whiteness, it was few and far between, I felt. But when it came to the people of color that I was being introduced to and were coming to learn from me, I still feel very connected to those people to this day.
And within that world, is that where you created the anti-oppression social club as well?
Oh, yes. Wow,
Yeah.
you really went on a deep dive. Yes.
What we do?
Yeah. The Anti-Oppression Social Club was, again, an attempt for me to create a space where we could boldly speak about these things. And I invited other people to join me in the teaching and the education of it. We had courses, and it was really meant to be, again, another space to deconstruct and to really talk about the messiness of it because people are so afraid to make a mistake and they're afraid to say the wrong thing. And ultimately, that fear ends up causing them to make more mistakes. And ultimately, a lot of people just end up not being a part of it altogether because that fear is so strong. And the moment that they do make a mistake, it's so confronting and they don't know what to do. And it's a whole thing. And so I wanted to create something that could help guide people through that process. It's not something I do anymore, but I felt like we did powerful work.
So I got to give you credit. You are brilliant at pivoting. I teach organization development and change management, and you are not afraid of change. I mean, I sort of want to like have you in front of my students and say, "See, change is not bad. Change is good." You went from yoga to DE&I, and in my mind, you said, "You know what? The root issue or the root cause of what we're facing possibly is the media," and you
Mhm.
pivoted into journalism. What gave you the courage to do that? Again, these are different worlds. People don't fully understand. These are different worlds. What gave you that courage?
Yeah, I still wonder to this day, girl, what were you thinking? I have to be honest, as of yesterday, I was like, what am I doing here? I will say I tend to be a very bold person and I can pivot fairly easily, but that doesn't mean it hasn't come with its own challenges and consequences. Coming from a very free spirited world like the wellness space, where there's very little regulation and people just do whatever they want. And there's so many conspiracy theories and there's a lot of paranoia around science and, facts. Coming from that world to now a world that is obsessed with facts and obsessed with the perception of those facts. And they're obsessed with research and obsessed with trying to figure things out and doing it in a very specific way. And journalism specifically, not just the media industry, but journalists are consistently told to tell stories in a very particular way. And it can box people in in order for them to keep their jobs, to keep their reputation and whatnot. And so for me, that's been a little bit harder to navigate. That's been the major challenge, is trying to challenge the industry and trying to challenge the mentality behind reporting on facts, quote unquote. What does that actually mean? Because I can tell you today, this is what happened in Palestine, but that's not reflective of the context of the colonial structure of Palestine. And so that is what the media industry has been battling, is in their attempt to be factual and in their attempt to be not unbiased, it has caused them to ignore a lot of the context, historical context of the colonial project that is Israel, that they continue replicating more propaganda against the Palestinians. And they have a really hard time contending with that. And so when I try to report on Palestine and do it in an actually factual way, with context, with perspective, I then am being told that I'm not a good journalist, or I'm not doing it properly, or I'm being biased. And I was told that multiple times by multiple editors and very prestigious mainstream media. And it was extremely difficult to navigate, so much so to the point that because I am so outspoken about these things, I feel like I was blacklisted. I'm sure people out there will say, "No, we didn't blacklist her." I feel like I was blacklisted. I couldn't find a job. Nobody would take my pitches. Even today, it's very hard for me to pitch a story about even, student protesters who are protesting UCLA, for instance, to divest their funds from, Israeli projects. People don't want to pick those stories up anymore. And so that makes it very difficult to be a working journalist these days. And I had to make a lot of sacrifices, but ultimately, it ended up being one of two things. You can either continue to boldly report on what's actually happening, or you can compromise and appease the powers that be and do what everybody else is doing in order for you to keep a job and a paycheck. It's not an easy decision either way, but for me, I could not forgive myself if I went the other direction. So I continue to move forward. It's not easy. It's very hard on the wallet, especially. But it's very important to me that I not stray from the deconstruction of colonial projects. And that includes being a part of this media industry.
What you're doing takes a lot of courage, and I think you're a phenomenal storyteller. I think that's what you probably realize, is storytelling is really what we have to get into more and more, sort of the idea of the podcast as well. So you talked about this a little bit, but if you could be a little bit more explicit, if possible, the media bias to protect the colonial power that is the U.S. How are you seeing that? Because you're in the trenches, you're hearing and you're seeing things. What does that look
Yes.
like?
It's not something that I just see happening with Palestine. I actually recognized it when it was happening to Palestine through my experience of reading westernized articles about my own country, about Puerto Rico. And I was like, "Oh, they're doing just the same thing, but in a more egregious way, because Palestine is actually going through a genocide." And so it felt even more like an emergency to call it out, because now people's lives are at stake, right? And so for my country, it's Western reporters reporting on our economy without the context of our colonial status, without the context of all of the bills and all of the laws that have been put in place by America in order to keep us subjugated to the American government. So that looks like our exports and imports are strictly American. So anything that's made on our island has to go back to America, then back to Puerto Rico and taxed. We have a lot of taxes in Puerto Rico. Americans are given tax breaks versus natives and locals are not. That opens up the door to gentrification, heavy, heavy gentrification. The town where my mom is from is being heavily gentrified. School closures are happening because the locals can no longer live there, while Americans are able to open up beachfront and beachside Airbnbs in order to make a profit, while the town slowly, slowly dies. And this is the reality of our economy. There's also a lot of political corruption on the island. Again, not because of us, because of Americans coming in and corrupting our political figures and forcing them, or perhaps they willingly do it, into taking bribes, political bribes, into pushing for statehood, which would colonize us even more. That would literally finish the colonial project if we became a state. And so all of this context becomes devoid of these articles where they are, again, quote unquote, being factual. This is what's happening in Puerto Rico today, but they're not including the context behind why this is happening in Puerto Rico today. So I was noticing that that level of propaganda was being pushed on the Palestinian community, right? It was being pushed against all of you. And it felt extremely egregious that the West, since 9/11, has had such a disdain for Arab and Muslim looking people that they will continue to push a narrative that is devoid of context and devoid of humanity. And that is on purpose. That is very much on purpose. And that is, for me, unacceptable.
When you first spoke up for Palestine, did you know what you were getting yourself into?
No, I never know what I get myself into. I just do it and then figure it out later, to sometimes my detriment. I have become such good friends with so many people, so many activists. And I feel like I consistently find myself surrounded by people who actually put into practice what they say. It's not that neoliberal mentality that I'm so used to, where it's, yes, we say all the right things, but we don't do the right things. And I'm consistently reminded of the fact that it is the people who, again, embody what they preach that are ultimately going to change the world. It has never been the people who are able to say good things and change happens. No, that's never been the case. It's always been the people who actively put their lives on the line, put themselves on the line in order to get people to change, in order for mentalities to change, in order for politics to change. So, no, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I'm so glad that I did because it has provided me a community that I really needed to be surrounded by.
Where did you start? What was your first book, or what was your first conversation to learn about Palestine? Just out of curiosity.
I think it was actually a protest. I remember the first protest I actually went to. And it may have been a story that I saw from Al Jazeera as well, but I have been a part of many political movements, and one of them was the Free Tibet movement. And I think through my research of the Tibetan struggle, I also learned about the Palestinian struggle and how all of our struggles were interconnected. And so I remember that I saw a poster for a Palestinian protest that was happening. And I don't remember exactly where I was living at the time because I've lived in so many places. But I went to this protest and I just thought, wow, like, this is so great. This is amazing. Like, we're actually fighting for something real. We're not just, fighting for a seat at the table. We're fighting revolutionarily. And and I just continued to educate myself, started watching Al Jazeera reports, which felt a lot more factual than what I was getting from a lot of Western media. And the more I learned over the years, the more I started to see, okay, yes, this is a part of a movement that I really want to continue being a part of. And then, of course, October 7th happened and it changed all of our lives. It just felt like a space that I needed to learn more about and needed to be a part of, and felt very familiar. It felt like your experiences were also my experiences. Your struggles were also my struggles. And it felt very important for me to be a presence there.
So basically, you're like, all right, well, you all don't want me to speak my mind. You all want to twist the narrative, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and just do my own thing. You ended up doing Stranger Fruit podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was a collaboration with a Black founder of the company who reached out to me and asked if I wanted to be a part of this. I had been on their show before. They had a version of that show previously. And so I had been a guest on that show, and they asked if I wanted to be a part of this. And I immediately said yes. It was so important to me to be a part of it, something different, radically different than what I had seen before. So I did that for about a year. We had a Spotify original podcast at first, and then we turned it into a show. They are back. I'm not a part of it anymore, but I still support it. I just recently found out that they are continuing their project in a different way. And so I'm very, very supportive of them. That was such a lovely time because we really talked. It was a panel style show where we really got into the nitty gritty of racism, colorism, cultural appropriation. We talked about political projects and what that means for us, and voting and what that means for people of color living in a colonial entity. It was both fascinating, educational, and also entertaining. We laughed a lot. We also cried a lot. We also talked about the trans struggle and, all of the issues that are happening, even just within the Black community, Latino community, where there is a lot of transphobia, just as there is in American culture. I highly suggest watching that show.
Well, I mean, it's not like you have the time because you have your own podcast now, correct?
Yeah.
Can you talk about your own podcast? I'm not going to even try to say the second word. It's political, and then I'll let you finish.
So the podcast is called Political Pendejadas.
Yeah.
Basically, what that translates to is political bullshit or political stupidity, if you will, if you want to, not curse. But yeah, it's basically where I break down by myself or with experts and guests. I break down a lot of the political constructs that we are constantly surrounded by, whether that's Donald Trump or the Democrats, MAGA, or, neoliberals. I break it all down and I piss everybody off while doing it. I'm not affiliated with any political party. And so sometimes people get upset with me when I, for instance, was criticizing Kamala Harris during the election. People were upset with me. And they also get upset with me when I criticize MAGA. So you can't make everybody happy, but you at least tell the truth.
Yeah. I actually lost a client because I criticized Harris, which is fascinating. It's just,
Congratulations.
yeah. Yeah. So what did you find using the vehicle of independent media? How did that empower you to really speak your truth where legacy platforms couldn't do that for you?
Yeah, I think there's also challenges with being independent as well. Obviously, financially, it's a struggle, but there is the freedom in the sense that you are not bound to whatever publication wants you to do, wants you to talk about, or how you say it. So, I am able to have an independent, like Green Party political figure on my podcast. I am able to have a socialist on my podcast. I am able to have different political candidates that aren't necessarily in the duopoly party system and talk honestly about the political environment that we find ourselves in and the struggle of finding who to vote for in this colonial system that we call a democracy that doesn't feel like a democracy most of the time because it isn't. It's a partial democracy. And so there's a lot of freedom in that. There's a lot of space to provide for that. But, there's also challenges where sometimes people don't take you seriously, especially within the industry, right? Oh, you're an independent journalist. Good for you. You get a lot of that elitism that comes with the industry. And, it is hard. I think a lot of mainstream media gets a lot of flack for taking ad money and being for-profit businesses, but that's why they are able to pay for certain investigations and investigative work to go out there with their cameras. Video journalism is not cheap. It's very expensive, more so than, just being a writer and putting up an article. There is the struggle of that. There's a lot of investigations that I would love to do. Can't afford it right now. There's a lot of work documentaries that I would love to create, especially the Palestinian struggle and the Puerto Rican struggle and how those two colonial projects are battling a bigger colonial power. I would love to make that documentary. There's no money. So there's that struggle, but the freedom is so liberating because I'm not tied to any publication and the perception that they want to put out there. I can have a Democrat, I can have a Republican, and I can also have a Green Party person. Like I can do whatever I want. Not that I would ever have MAGA on, but just as an example.
So you're in California, correct?
I am.
So I don't know if you know, I went to USC. That's where I got my doctorate.
Okay.
But I have to say, I loved LA at one point. Now that whole experience to me was just horrible, especially when USC refused to let that valedictorian speak. I think her name was Esna. What did you learn about that period of time? And I know I'm going after my own school here, but it really did leave a sour taste in my mouth, especially with a school that focuses on DE&I,
Yeah.
ostensibly focusing on DE&I rather. So it was a bit of a heartbreak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have all been very disappointed with our educational institutions here. UCLA, USC have not been devoid of making a lot of mistakes and very egregious mistakes when it comes to how they have chosen to go about everything. I reported at USC last year, right when the students decided to protest and attempted to build their own encampment alongside with UCLA, but their encampment at USC was immediately destroyed and didn't happen because they are a private institution. And so it just wasn't possible for them to do it there like they did at UCLA. But when I was there, yeah, the institution had a lot of PR statements that they wanted to provide. And I interviewed Asna's genocide studies professor for the article that I made. And he was just in shock. He wasn't fully understanding why the institution was taking the stance that they decided to take. But, ultimately, what it proved to me is that it continues to show me that it's incredibly important to, again, deconstruct people as much as I can through the mediums that I have access to, because these things are not going to go away. One day it's USC, the next day it's going to be somebody else. And again, you have to show people, not tell people that you are trustworthy. And so just like mentioned that they show themselves or present themselves as being so pro DEI and so pro inclusion and equity and bringing in students of color, ultimately they proved that they are not a safe space. They are not a safe space because of their actions, not because of their words. And so it's important to show that, to have people be accountable to the words that they claim to say. And I can do that, through my own medium, but poets can also do that. Singers can also do that and do it consistently. And I think it's important for us to continue.
You probably know USC's motto is fight on. And
Mhm.
I had commented, you guys really push fight on to your student population, but it was very clear it was fight on unless it has to do with Palestine
Mhm.
and unless it has to do with something of true substance. So again, it's just very disappointing. So it was very unfortunate.
Yeah, and that's the neoliberal way, right? Fight on as long as we remain comfortable, as long as we don't feel challenged by your fight.
Speaking of California, Butch Ware, who was a previous guest on the podcast, is running for governor. What are
Yes.
your thoughts about him? Have you met him?
I just found out that he's running for governor. I have met him. I attempted to create a piece on not just him, but all the independent party people that were in the last election that didn't get mainstream media coverage, but independent journalists were trying to get them some coverage. That story was supposed to get posted for PBS and they shut it down. So it never got published. But I have heard him speak in person. I have met him in person. Ultimately, I think we need more bold people to run for office. We need more options in our political sphere. We cannot continue with this. Well, these are the only options we have. Therefore, we have to choose the lesser of two evils. That cannot continue to be the reality of the system anymore. People are not falling for that anymore. The last election proved that many people stayed home. They saw the two options presented in front of them. They knew that this was going to be bad, so they opted out completely.
Yeah.
And then the people who did vote didn't even like the person that they were voting for most of the time. And so that cannot continue to be our reality. So we need more options on the ballot, whether it's local elections or national elections. I really like that he continues to put himself out there because it is not easy to become a political figure. You are under constant criticism and constant attack. So I really, really commend him for doing it. And I hope to have him on my podcast really soon.
I'll connect you.
Yay.
With you. It'd be my pleasure. You should actually check out his episode too that we did. It was very informative. He does not give a damn. He will speak the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, he just keeps it real all times. So your motto really is disrupt, dismantle, and decolonize. That's what your goal is, I'm going to say, till the end of time, right?
Forever, yes.
Well, what do you want your legacy to be? If we look back 30 or 40 years from now, what do you want us to remember you for?
Wow, that's a great question. Fearlessness. I hope that people are able to remember me for the fearlessness that I am consistently scared of consequences. I am not immune to fear, but I do it anyway. And that level of fearlessness that I hope I am presenting to people is not a thing that I do for me. It's a thing that I do to hopefully inspire other people to do the same. And, now I am a union organizer, and I felt like I had to be a part of something bigger than just being a part of this media industry. As a union organizer, I have to consistently face my fear and do it anyway, because now I have to protect other people around me too. I have to protect other union members. And anything I do, the disrupt, dismantle, decolonize, that is a motto that I consistently live by because it's that important to me. We have to disrupt these systems. We have to dismantle the mentality that they're forcing on us. And ultimately, we decolonize by doing those two things first. And we are able to go back to a world that is inclusive, that is borderless, that ultimately redefines who we are as humanity and deconstruct a lot of these colonial behaviors that we have been taught to replicate. That is how we get there, by facing the fear and doing it anyway.
And what message do you have for our audience? And I'm thinking specifically the Palestinians and the diaspora, or the ones that are actually in Palestine, hearing from you, a non-Arab, non-Palestinian. What message would you have for them?
Oof. They have a message for me, honestly. I'm friends with a journalist that is out of the West Bank, and they inspire me so much because the West Bank has gone through hell and back, and the journalists continue pushing forward. Not only pushing forward, inviting people to be a part of the fight, and also so generous with their time, so generous with whatever it is that they have. They are so generous with it. And they inspire me constantly. So I don't actually feel like it's my right to have a message for them because they are the ones who are inspiring the rest of us. I'm not under siege. I am not under constant threat of being bombed or, having a sniper out my window. When I go outside to report on a story, I'm not afraid to go to jail. They are consistently every single day. And they are committed to getting the story out as best as they can with whatever means that they have. So their message to us, I would say, is not to stop, not to be silent, because people's lives are dependent on showing the truth. So we have to be a witness to that. We can't turn our backs on it.
Thank you for that. That's powerful. I really do appreciate that. Last thing, independent media is expensive. Podcasts, people don't realize, is very expensive. How do we support you?
Thank you. Yes. So people can subscribe to my Substack. That's the best way to not only get access to the podcast, but also to provide, a few dollars every month to the cause. Eventually, I will fundraise for a project, but not currently right now. So the Substack is the best way to do it. And they can also follow me on Instagram and, support there and share the stories. All of us are being shadow banned right now. It is a very, very stressful time for creators who are dependent on their stories getting out. So definitely, comment, like, share, like all the things, and engage, because that ultimately helps to, bring people back to the cause. So yeah, Substack, Instagram, and eventually I'll be back on YouTube as well. So people can become members.
And when you work on that project about Palestine and Puerto Rico, let me know. Let's chat at some point about that too. I think that would be great.
Absolutely. Yes, I would love that.
Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate you.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for some mood.